Okay, guys, welcome to May 27th, 2022's Friday Live. I'm Charles Delsh, founder of FM BetterForms, and we also have a number of our team, which we'll introduce as they come on later on. In today's meetup, what we want to do is we wanted to give you guys the opportunity to ask a bunch of edge case questions, and we can tackle some of those. So I think we got about 70–80% of the questions that we've run into today. So that's going to be our main thing that we're going to be covering. I'm just going to talk about a little bit of what's happening over in BetterForms land. In terms of our news, we don't have a ton of new news, but the main thing is BetterForms workshops have just recently been introduced. You can get those from our marketing site. You can register for those. They are very, very, very basic introductory type things. The majority of the people on this call, the workshop will be a little bit more advanced, but there might be some little tidbits here and there that you might pick up anyway. We will be recording all of them. We have already recorded the first one, and that's available on the descriptions page if you follow that from the marketing site. End of life for BetterForms older version. So we started BetterForms about 5+ years ago. And in the very, very early days, it was kind of a semi-private kind of thing with just a handful of people. Dan, who I think I saw on the call here today, was one of our initial OGs. And we could pump out versions, sometimes 2 and 3 a day. And at some point we created some breaking changes, so we had to lock those versions in. And we are now going to be not supporting some of those older versions. We won't leave you abandoned. So if there is something that we're having problems with, we have a list of things that a few people, Eduardo and Christina on our team, are primarily working on for some compatibility things, for some various edge cases and some new bugs that have arisen with upgrading. But for the most part, the majority of people should be pretty smooth. There's very, very small changes to be able to use our latest version. I just want to mention quickly how versioning works in BetterForms. We have what we call our base code, which is the code that your app is running, or it's interpreting your schema and rendering that. That's the real BetterForms, if you will. Not the editor, which is just an application that runs on top of that. And we have currently in production, we have 4-ish versions of that code. We have 2 older ones, which have 1 breaking change in between those. And then there's another one, BF latest, which for a long time, we continue to push out updates that are non-breaking into that. We're going to be taking BF latest, and we'll probably lock that as a version so that you have the ability to stay there in case there is something that is unstable. And that will replace those 2 older versions. And then our BF staging will become our new BF latest. And we'll continue to push out versions automatically that way. The idea is that we can keep our base code evergreen, so it's constantly being updated with things with non-breaking changes. We've added a lot of stuff into BF staging. We've added things like messaging, improved error trapping, OAuth, site workflows, multi-threaded actions processor. So it processes all the actions in threads. So there's a ton of enhancements that have gone into that. And all of our tests show that it's 100% compatible, but we're worried about some edge cases. So that's why we're going to keep that other version there so nobody gets hung or trapped in any fashion. You shouldn't have to run to your computer to solve something solve any kinds of problems that way. So that's happening. We're going to be doing that over the soft date is for July 15th, but we may end up having to extend that if we don't, if we have some applications that are unconverted or such. Custom error pages has been released, and we have a public API documentation for that. I've put that in the links for this Friday Live here, and it looks something like this. Basically, it allows you to generate your own error pages. We talked about this in the prior Friday Lives, but this is all sort of pretty much wrapped up now. We are continuing to fine-tune the responses for every type of error. There's maybe 30 or 40 different types of errors along an entire workflow that can be trapped for. So we're trying to fine tune how each one of those fails, how loudly it fails, if you will. Some of them we want very, very quiet. If your app goes offline, for example, we want that to be quiet. But other ones, like your FileMaker server is offline, we need that to fail a little louder. You can, what's neat is we have two types of error pages, basically ones that will run in your app. That's when we can render your app, where your app is like kind of limp mode or it's alive. And then if there's something catastrophic that's happened, we also have another third party server type independent page as well. This custom error page, the one that looks like this anyway, that one's only available for FM BetterForms domains at the moment, not custom domains. The dynamic error pages, you can configure everything. You can, if you don't have an error page defined in your application, you just basically create a nav slug with /error, and that becomes your new error page, and you can style it up, theme it up, do whatever, anything you want, as well as run all kinds of actions because it's just a BetterForms page. Passed into the model or query parameter. Model of that page is the, I might be the query parameter, I might be wrong here. Sorry, my mistake. Passed into app for that page is the most recent error. So that way you can grab that and render that information in here. That's how we're passing that in. And there's some examples here. You can also overwrite all of the default behaviors anywhere in the system of any error. So if you want to trap for something like we've gone offline, or you want to trap for form not found or something like that, you can have a special workflow for that and code your whole actions. So we've made it pretty much, I think, as flexible as we possibly can, but at the same time, if you do absolutely nothing, it's still functional. So that is custom error pages. And what else we got coming up here? We're going to be presenting BetterForms at .fmp in Berlin. .fmp is like Pause on Air, but the European version. And I'll be attending that conference and presenting BetterForms API there. The API, we might get a chance to talk about it, but it's basically a feature that's built into every BetterForms app that gives you an entire REST API pretty much for free. You don't have to really do too much in terms of code. Okay, so having said that, let's jump into our main presentation here. We have a number of different questions. We'll try to work through some of them. Some of them will go into a little bit more detail. Some of the team has prepared different examples and such for, and then other ones are a little bit, we'll just sort of talk about them. And I don't have the person who's submitted these, so if you were submitting and I don't answer your question, please just let us know. So the first one here, and I think this came from somebody, well, it definitely did. Why and when to use queries rather than the model or the app for passing parameters? So just for background, if we're on a given page in BetterForms, and I don't know if I have a, let me find an example page here. Here. If I'm on a given page in BetterForms, actually it can even be in the editor, it doesn't really matter here. And I want to transition from one page to the other. So let me just pull up this page here. All right, actually, sorry, I was demonstrating how a print would work. So I'm on this page here. This is just a silly page. It doesn't do much, it's just some dynamic stuff. And I want to transition to another page. The question is how do we pass the parameters from one section to the other? How do we maintain that context or that the app or the model, or what mechanism? So just to talk about what the mechanisms are, we can use a query parameter. That's when we're adding something up in here. Query parameter, and generally in a URL is the URN part of it. So it's the stuff that comes after including the question marks. You might have something like question mark, and then, token or ID equals something like this at the end of the ID on your URL. So that would be called the query, and query parameters can support multiple concatenations. So there can be an and sign. They have to be URL encoded. Browser usually takes care of that anyway. So you don't have to, for the most part, you don't have to worry about it. But we might have something like ID client equals 222. And then you might have something else, and, enabled equals false or something like that. So that's a query parameter. There's pros and cons of using those. So I'm just going to go through to answer this question is when. A good time to use a query parameter when you need the link to be predictable. So that means you can potentially calculate the link ahead of time. You may want to dynamically generate a link, and that's when you're sending out a smart link to a third party or somebody, to a user, and they're going to click on it in their SMS, or they're going to open it up in their email. So that's a predictable link. And that particular link has no context. There's no other history of the app. They haven't logged in. They haven't invoked a bunch of things and gone there. So that's a time that a query parameter is pretty much your only mechanism for doing that. The links are computable, so that means you can calculate the link. I think I mentioned that. Calculate the link ahead of time. They're contextless, so you have to be able to use that page without having any other context in the app. That includes the app model, which is a global data store. It includes any page models from any of the other pages as well. So that's the ideal time to use a query. When do you use the model? This is model. When do you use the model or the app? Or I also mentioned local storage, because that's another storage mechanism. And cookies are technically another mechanism for passing data from place to place. There might even be something else that I've missed here. There's two types of local storage. There's local storage and session storage, and they function almost identically. Just one persists across a browser closing. So when would we use the model, the app, or local storage, or a cookie? Actually, model in the app is when the state is varying. So a good example of that is the BetterForms editor. You may or may not have noticed this. If you're working across multiple organizations, one of the features we sort of semi-silently pushed out is that you can have two different organizations open. So this would apply to most of our team, because we do that type of stuff. Chris, I think you have a few different organizations as well. Yep. You can have both organizations open, and before we never really tracked the state. So back on the server, we said, okay, Chris is logged into organization A. So that means if he tries to make a save in organization B, the back end would check and say, you're not authorized to do that. You're not, is it like from a security aspect? So we've made some changes to that. So now you can actually have two separate tabs open, totally different apps, and go about most of the editing seamlessly with having the tabs remember. So there's a lot of context that has to happen there. Now we can't have an active organization, and this is any type of multi-tenant app where the user can belong to different tenants. Developer can belong to multiple organizations. So in order to do that, we can't remember it on the server, because we don't know what tabs the user has open, and we don't want to like have a whole array of open tabs and try to remember what the user is doing. So we remember that context on the front end, and we actually use local storage for that. So that way you can survive refreshes and things. You'll also notice when in BetterForms, when you're jumping around here, we remember what app you're in. Within the editor itself, and that'll be page specific. So in our case, because it's a very, very edge case, we're actually using local storage for remembering that information. We do remember some of that information in the app, and we do not usually use the model for that particular application, just for the actual data on the page. So when the state varies is the first one. The state is hard to compute, or it's not predictable. I don't know what the person has done to get here. I can't reproduce this easily. So for example, I'm in Charles' demo app, and I'm in my dev environment, and I'm on the job application page. That's a lot of history that I had to remember. In order to do that, we could have done it in a query parameter, and originally we used to do it in a query parameter. But now it's changed, and now we just remember it in local storage, which is a little bit, in some aspects, a little bit easier for us, and in the app model. Data is already in the client. That's another really good time that you'd want to do this, is if you're going from a list view to a detail view, or a detail modal even, and you really are just presenting a bit of extra data. For example, you have a list view of a whole bunch of vehicles for sale, and then I want to click on a specific one, and I want to see a summary of that, just that one vehicle, but maybe not a ton of extra data, just maybe the price and maybe how much it would be a month or something like that, and maybe a bigger picture. For something like that, I don't really need to contact the server to grab that data again. I already have the data in the front end. So then in that case, I would use something like the app model. And as a design pattern, we use, I often call it active, whatever it is, active vehicle, active form, active this, just as a mental, like a naming convention. And that active object would be the one that I would pass into the app model, and then subsequently pass into the modal. One of the nice things about doing, you can do hybrid techniques like this as well, is you can pass an object from, let's say, the parent view, which is a list of, it's an array, JSON array of objects. I pass that one single object into the app model, open up the card modal. The card modal does not have an on-form request enabled, and instead the initial action when the card modal opens is it grabs the data from the app and it puts it into the model, it copies it. So it's, model.mycar equals app.mycar. And then I display that. And then after that, I run a hook to the server and I get the subsequent information. So this way I can render something instantly, and then a split second later, I can backfill all the data with a detail. So that's kind of a hybrid technique. I'm wondering if we have something like that. I don't think we have something here. We've built stuff like this before, and it works out really, really nice because you see data instantly, especially master detail views. And then as soon as the detail loads, the rest of the data comes in a split second later. And the other option is when we want to pass data backwards without a refresh. So quite often you have big data sets that are in the front end, and you don't really want to fetch 100 records again from the server after you've edited one record. So we push the edit to the server, and then we manually pass back in through the app model the mutated single record, and we find that in the array and we update it on the front end. So they update in the front end and the back end kind of in sync with the server. So those are a few different mechanisms. I hope that I don't have exact examples of all of these because it'd be a lot of coding, but I hope that answers that first question. Does anybody have any questions about that before we jump on to the next thing?
Just one question, Charles. Can you show an example of local storage?
Yeah, we can actually. And this is pretty cool. Okay, so I'm going to go to this page here. And we've done some things to build some stuff in. So I'm going to say, I'm going to grab an input field. And this is like super small here. I'm just going to grab an input field. And I'm going to put this on here. And we'll just change the label to my input to my name. Save this. Okay, so here, let me just turn off this print action here just a second. So here's an example of, I was just mentioning before our call, how JavaScript can block. And this is a JavaScript thing, not a BetterForms thing. It's a browser thing. This print window is opened up and it's just doing the browser print function, but it blocks this other tab, which happens to be coming from the same domain. So it blocks the other tab from functioning. So you may see stuff like that. You got to really watch out for that. This is an on-form load. I was just demonstrating how to create an automatic printing page. Okay, so we have this page here, and let's say I want to remember some data here. Right, I put my name, Charles, and if I hit refresh, my name is gone. Right, my name has disappeared. But if I go into my data model and I create a key called what is name first, and I'm just going to create it as an empty object or empty string, and I'm also going to make sure that my data model uses name first. There we go. Okay, so I've saved that. So now this is using name first here. Should be there. It is there. Ignore this other stuff that's in the default model, I guess. And I want to remember that, right? If I refresh this, it's gone, right? Without doing a form load. But we have a new feature here. Now this is, I wouldn't say it's experimental because we use it all the time. But it's not fully released yet. It is in our documents, and it basically says cache in tab or cache in browser. And I just basically enable that key. So this key will automatically show up as you add keys here. They'll show up in this list, and I hit save. So now when I put Charles in here, I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to hit refresh. Charles is back, right? So this is really amazing for when you're filling out forms, because now you have this persistence. Now, I'm just going to bookmark, copy this. I want to close the tab. Now, if I open this tab again and paste this in here, move the tab over to here, it's gone. So it'll survive a refresh, but it won't survive tab closing. The other option, cache in browser, and there's a little bit of a description in here as well as to which they are, and there's a link to the documentation there. Cache in browser, this one will now survive the closing of the tab, but use this very cautiously, because this can potentially be a security breach for your application. That means if you're putting data in this tab, and you'll see this with all documentation on local storage, be very careful. You're basically saving whatever they've typed in the browser, in the cache area of the browser. And that means when somebody else comes up to that computer and they open up, and they can inspect that, and they can, basically, it's not encrypted. So it's not, and it's not really, it's still hackable. We can't really encrypt it ourselves and put it on here unless we sent the data to the server, because there'd have to be some kind of private key thing. So we can't keep it secure here. There. So just be careful if you are doing something like that. This one here is fine, because as soon as they close the tab, it's presumed that the data is gone, right? That's a reasonable expectation. You can also manually control this stuff, and you can use local storage really easy on your own. Now, the same thing happens when you go into site settings here. So I have, let's if I added a key called, my app or something like that, or active thing, and maybe that's an object or whatever it is the active thing is, I can just the same. Did we disable this? We used to have this here. I just noticed something. Oh, okay. You have to be on a bigger screen. That looks like that's kind of a UI type bug there, but on a wider screen, I can turn on caching for my active thing, and now that will survive page refreshes. So BetterForms uses some of that same tech under the hood to keep in mind, to remember that context. Every scenario, it's hard to go through every scenario, Dan, but every scenario is going to be a little bit different. But if you just remember, you check off this, it will remember that thing, and then whatever you put in there will survive. It's a life cycle depending on what option you have selected.
Great.
How does that work with modals, Charles?
It does, yeah. The modal, it's the local storage, so the one that's in the form, the pages, this one here, this one is linked to the form ID. So it won't survive deployments currently. It's not linked to the navigation slug. We'll probably end up changing the way it works underneath the hood at some point, but it's based on the form ID. So that if you show a modal and then hide it and then show the same modal again, that same data will effectively persist there. FileMaker server will override that data. If you have an on-form request hook, then it effectively gets ignored, because in an on-form request, the data comes from our server to your FileMaker server. You hydrate that with data, and then it goes to the front end. So there would never be a time that you'd want to override. So FMS is king there.
Okay.
All right, next one, user management. Do I modify the BF helper to add attributes or modify my own file? And this is pretty simple. Don't touch the helper file. Unless there's a really, really logical reason, you're adding maybe some additional analytics to it. Some people have done some neat things to look for slow hook times and things like that. The file is meant to be cyclable and updatable. So that means there's only one script that interfaces to FileMaker and the rest of it you can migrate fairly easily. We don't change it. It's only changed about 5 times over the past 5 years, but it does change. And if you don't change it, you don't take advantage of new features. So for example, the latest, it just got updated about a week ago approximately. We just updated our helper file. We didn't push that out as an update because it's very minor changes, but it includes things like auto pruning. That actually happened a couple versions ago, auto pruning of the records. So there's a preferences table layout somewhere in there, and you can set the maximum number of inbox records that you want. That just stops your server from getting too bloated. It includes things like authentication groups. This is a new feature that we've added to support some edge cases where you have a user who has a multi-tenant application and they have multiple domains, but they don't want to manage separate helper files for each one of those groups of users. So they still want the users scoped to a specific domain, but the helper file they want to share amongst everything. And that was the one flexibility that we didn't have. So Eduardo coded that up about 6 months ago or so. And that's a new thing. That's a new feature in the helper file. There's also the ability for messages and channels and things like that that you wouldn't be able to take advantage of if you've modified your file. And the more you, as you know, it's not that easy to migrate change code into two files, two separate FileMaker files, and merge those together. That doesn't happen currently in our ecosystem. So that means you probably won't bother to update it, which means you won't be able to take advantage of any of those new features in the future. So I really, really recommend not modifying it. Our helper file, it's like version 1 that we use in BetterForms. We've kind of patched it here and there with some of the new features. We haven't updated it at all. It hasn't been updated in 4+ years, right? Hardly any changes have gone into it. Generally, you don't need to modify or do anything specific in there. If you do, it's probably a design pattern that maybe you don't, maybe it's not clear what a better solution would be, but generally the idea is don't change any code in here or don't hack it up. I'm going to jump to the next one if nobody has any questions. This one here, what on action types can be used with BetterForms snippets? And are there ones for on field enter, on modify, and on field exit? So what this question is basically saying, what triggers can I make when I like click into here? So this the blur goes into here. When I click out of here, when I maybe change some data and so on. And I don't have a clear list of those. There are 1 or 2 that are in our base code that are not fully documented. I'm not sure if Christina, we were just talking about this yesterday. But basically the ones that you'll pretty much can use and you can do pretty much everything with is it's called on changed, I forget, actions. On changed actions. And let me just grab an alert here and pop that in. On changed actions, make sure that's the right one. Yeah, so that's running, and that's every time this changes, I'm running something. That is almost enough to do almost everything with. The exiting of the field, we don't have one for that. It is possible to add some, because when you click onto this, even though we're using view with a virtual DOM and all that, it's not, you're still actually touching the real DOM when your cursor is in. So you could attach, if you wanted to use, say, jQuery, attach something that when you exit the field, that it fires an action. You could do something like that easy enough, I think, as well. So if there is an edge case, we'll help you code it up. But I don't have a clear list. We'll try to get one over the next little bit and maybe make an example of that. I think that would be good for an example page. All right, next thing is, and Andrew's going to take this one, is it possible to run a named action when you leave a page similar to the on layout exit in FileMaker? So that's BetterForms already has a trigger that when you enter the page, actually it has one before you enter the page, after the page is rendered, so on form request and on form load. But can we do anything to trigger some actions when you exit a page? And Andrew, did you want to take this one?
Yep, sure.
All right.
So I've created an example here called navigation guards. It is public, so you can use it as reference. But all we have on this page are 2 buttons. one that pathed away successfully, and all it does is runs an action that paths to home, and then one that paths somewhere else but fails, and that paths to some other slug. Doesn't have to be buttons. And on that page, it looks like this. And if you try to path away successfully, it'll work and run some actions. If you try to path away to another page, it will fail. And the only thing we're doing here is in the page info. Well, this would be in your on upload, but for this example, it's in the page info. We have a function called before each. It's tied to the router, and it takes 3 parameters. 2, which is the page you're pathing to. From is the page you're pathing from. And next is basically whether or not to continue the path or not. It's either false or nothing. And basically here, I'm just checking what page I'm coming from. This is the navigation page. It's also checking the page you're pathing to. And I'm checking if it's pathing to home, I can run the action as normal. If I'm pathing away to another page or else, it will fail and stop the navigation. So where is this useful? I made an example. For example, let's say you had a save form. Looks something like this. And you wanted to remind the user whether or not to save when exiting the page. You can do that. For example, if I clicked on the other page, in this modal, which I click to save. If you click on yes, yep, saves correctly. If you click on no, it will just leave without saving. And
Very cool.
All we're doing here is this is a normal save form. This is a template that you can grab. There's nothing going on in the actions. This is all being run in the on upload. So if you go to the action scripts page, I have another tab open here. In the on upload, we have the same thing we saw in the previous example. I'm checking the page I'm coming from, which is the save form. I'm also checking for one other thing. It's not super fine-tuned, but I'm checking if it's coming from the modal, because the modal also runs a path, and it also has to check for that as well. But that's it, really. The one thing to note is that if you're trying to path to another page that isn't part of your app, it won't check that. For example, if I'm on this page, I'm trying to path to our forms, for example, that can't be checked for this example, at least. It might be possible with some more.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But if it's within the app, it will check and ask for a save. I don't know, Charles, if you had a.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So basically, the gist is you have to register, if you will, these actions. Now, we don't have this built into the framework in the sense of there's not a global named action called like in Andrew. Could you just go to the app level global actions? We have reserved ones called on upload. There's another one called on login. I think, I don't know, there might be some more. I wrote most of the DNA for the software. I honestly don't know. These are sort of reserved. These are reserved named actions. I think there are a couple other ones. We don't have one called on navigational change. All right, but you can easily add it yourself, is what Andrew's doing. So the on navigational change was probably going to be it's something, if we find that a lot of people would use it, we'll just add it into the base code here. So you basically have to register the route change. You have to say, whenever it changes, I want you to run this action. And then that action, it's up to you now to decide what to do. It's not something that sits at the page level. Although maybe we could, it generally sort of sits at the global level, because you could be pathing from one place to the other within the app. I should mention also, I'm not sure, Andrew, you might want to experiment with this, but I think it'll re-trigger it as well, is a query parameter change. So if you went from item A to item B with a query. So if you were to just, so this one here has got the navigational guard, this page, right?
Yes.
Could you just add something like $ID = 1, 2, 3 or something like that? And then there we go. Yeah, so it does check it on the query parameter, which is really, really useful. I think this is a really, really cool example. If you're filling out any kind of big form, that's a great UX enhancement there.
Charles, do you think there is a way to get to the point that if they go to close the tab and the model has changed, like you'd store the initial model, compare
So
it to
I
the
don't
current
know if you can
model?
do the close the tab, because all of those hijacking sites that open up tabs on your thing would they would have exploited that already, and you wouldn't be able to.
I have an app I can show you. I use a software
Uh-huh.
package that if I don't save before I go to close the tab, it warns me.
Does it do it on the mouse movement? Because some apps will
Well,
see
it
the mouse.
doesn't either if I try to refresh or if I try to close the tab, it alerts me that you have unsaved changes. Are you sure you want to
Interesting.
do this?
Yeah, I'm not positive. They must be doing something. There must be something that's running on that. And it's definitely 100% possible because it's just JavaScript, right? So
Yeah.
it might register something else. This technique here is registering it's firing the event. These things are called events when something happens in the system and it triggers, right? In FileMaker, we call it a trigger. Trigger and event are synonymous. It's firing that event when the navigation route path, the thing that's in the URL, changes.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? But there are other events that happen within the browser as well. And there's probably something on, tab about to be closed or something like that. If you happen to be playing a home game and Googling it right now, let us know what you find. But there's probably something like that, in which case you could easily add the trigger. One of the cool things is what BetterForms does, I think, really, really well is it blends actions, which are a BetterForms thing, with FileMaker and with the browser itself. And they're very, very seamless. It's very easy to add to run a named action right in with any raw, very, very conventional JavaScript. So if you go and find some JavaScript that does something and the person is in the middle of the script that's saying, okay, I call the server here with this Ajax call and blah, 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 you can just replace that with named action, utility hook or something like that. So it does that really well. So if you do find a mechanism, it's very easy to integrate. Feel a high level of confidence that you could do that. If your app can do it, we can do it as well. I just don't know how. All right, thanks, Andrew. That was cool. I think that's something we should build into the editor, right? Because that really sucks when you go and make some changes and you navigate away.
Yes.
All right, so it's like we should build that. Actually,
Agreed.
one of the changes that is coming out to UX is to not have save buttons. If you notice, more and more apps don't have any save buttons anymore. It's kind of FileMaker. We've always had that, right? We've had that like no save button for 30 something years, but and that's always been a weird thing. But that's the nature of applications now, is to get rid of the save. So latest Pearson's design is auto saves, and it doesn't have a save button. He wants to get rid of the save. So, and at first it's like you want to push back and say, well, I need that save, but do you really need the save? And as long as we handle graceful rolling back or the states up to that point, then it's not a problem. So that's something we're working on. All right. Next question is, let's see, we'll jump to here. What's the best approach for authorizing third-party applications? So this is pretty cool. What's the best approach for authorizing third-party options such as Google from BetterForms, for example, if we want to allow users to sync their data, their calendar and Google Calendar data, the BetterForms data, sorry, and the Google Calendar data. Really, it's their server-side data, which requires them to authorize the link when you open additional things. In other words, you want to build an integration into your app. And you want to make that integration flexible for each user rather than you just add your own, let's say, S3 or whatever integration in the back end of your application. So I've got a link here, and I don't have an example. We didn't build an example for this one, but I will walk through how to do this. And because we are recording this, it should cover all of the tricky bits. So in our Friday Live notes, I've added this article here, and this is an example of from Dropbox on how to integrate OAuth. Now, we're not using OAuth for authentication authentication within BetterForms. We're using OAuth for authenticating BetterForms FileMaker server to that particular user's Dropbox in this case. And because it's OAuth, they're all more or less the same. You will have to code each one slightly by hand. So the main gist is, and I don't know if this example here is going to be good enough here. The main gist is you're in your app. So we're somewhere on our app. We would most likely show a card modal. If first we'd have a button that says, integrate my Dropbox, integrate my Google Calendar. There would be some type of button here. We click on that button, we would open up a modal, most likely, instead of taking the user all the way off. Or you might show them some preamble of information like, by integrating this and this, you'll be able to do all of these great whiz-bang features. We open up a card modal, and in the on-form request for the card modal, we need to go back to our FileMaker server. And is this the same one? Yeah, here it is. We need to go back over, we're at this point here, and we generate a URL. So we take a little bit of information that we have, like our callback, like if it's successful, what link we're going to go to. We generate a, we add our client ID and things like that, right? So our client ID is already registered with Google as an application. And it means my SaaS company has a registration there. Generate this link, and we throw that into an iframe on the modal. So now you have this iframe on this modal here, and that iframe will hit that OAuth page, and the OAuth page will render. It'll say something like SAS.fm BetterForms would like to use Google Calendar and whatever features. You also have embedded the list of features that you want to enable for this particular thing. It's highly recommended to use the least amount of features as possible because that gives the most approval. If you know yourselves, if you see like they want to know everything about you, then yeah, forget that, right? If they just want to learn one or two things, that's much better. People will trust the OAuth company more than they'll trust your app. You'll trust Google more than you'll trust your app. I don't know why that is though. That's a whole other story. So now you got this modal. Google will render the modal. You'll either have to sign in if you're not signed in. If you are signed in, you just have to authenticate and you'll continue. Google will then, or Dropbox will then do a forward of that browser to your callback URL. Now this isn't an iframe in a modal, okay? So this is all happening inside a modal. So that iframe will redirect to the redirect URL. That redirect URL in your app can even be the same page, but it'll also have a query parameter at the top. That query will be your temporary authentication token. You'll take that query, and because there's an on-form load, you'll take that query in FileMaker now, you'll call Google directly and say, I have this token that was generated a couple seconds ago. Can I exchange that for a permanent token? They'll exchange that and send you back. I'm saying Google Dropbox will exchange that, give you back the permanent token now. And now I have this permanent token that I save in my database and I'm authorized forever, or as long as that lasts. So that's kind of the gist. Now that's kind of what's happening in here. There's a bit better of an explanation down, I noticed in this one. It's setting up your app. This talks about how to set up all the parameters in Dropbox, on the Dropbox side, to set up to register an application. Google's similar, Auth0 is similar. All of these companies are very similar to that. And here, user presses connect, right, or link. Your app redirects the user in a modal. Doesn't have to be a modal, but it's probably a better user experience, to a Dropbox web page. They click allow, and this would be your company's, your integration. That redirects the modal, which is in an iframe, to a yes success page. You read that in an on-form request in your server, and you hit their OAuth2 token page and exchange that for a real token. It's actually not that complicated. It looks kind of complicated, but it's actually not too bad. It's really technically about 2 pages. You can put them into 1 page, and it's the on-form request take care of all the business. So I hope that's enough to get started. We don't have an example for that. If you guys can think of an example that everybody could use, we could code that up for you though. Something that almost every app could use. I don't know what, but it's kind of a software as a service type specific thing. Any questions about that at all? A lot of information.
How does the query, you know, you said that after they've given permission, that you get that temporary token back. How is that then picked up again in FileMaker?
Great question. So it's a temporary token and it's attached to a URL. That URL is the callback URL. That callback URL is your app / pound / say my integration callback. And that particular form page has an on form request hook enabled. So as soon as that page goes to load, it's actually running a script again in your FileMaker side.
So you basically you can use it to run the script twice to do the two actions of building the original URL that you're going to load, and then as a callback to create to use the temporary token to get the right. Okay.
Now the callback can also be an API endpoint as well. You could be calling back the BetterForms API. You could call that back and push it in that way too. It's the same thing, right? It's just as easy the other way though. And the other way gives you a bit of UI. Then you also have to, at some point, once it's successful, some kind of wrapper around that success box, this box here. Now remember this inside, right in this area here, just a second. This area right in this box would be your iframe. So in here, you just put a close, right? So you don't even have to have the success tell the modal to close. You can just have it say it's great, everything's great, and then you can just have the close button at the top. And they can just click and close the modal, and you're all done.
Excellent.
All right. Hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks.
Okay, let's jump to our next one here. And let's lose that big spot on the screen. Okay, what do we got next? JavaScript debugging. Somebody had asked about that somewhere in there. So I'm going to pass this over to Eduardo. He's going to show us maybe some techniques.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's go for not the most fun part of developing, as everybody probably thinks about it. Debugging. Can you see this example?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, here is just a simple example of a page that adds or subtract the value there from the counter. And then let's say, yeah, this is the regular console for the browser. And let's say we add an unexpected behavior there. So here. So then.
So Eduardo, just so we understand what the buttons are doing, can you explain how when you click on those, what's happening in there?
It's just a named action that I call from both buttons. They call the same named action that's called handle button click. And then in there, I'm just checking it, which button was clicked, and then do whatever I'm supposed to do. Either increment or decrement.
Okay.
So then I'm counting. Then for some reason now I added this bug. I'm not sure what's going on. You could easily go here in the named action, let's say, and then you notice that the issue seems to be on the negative button. So you just add a console log here, for example. button minus, and then you want to see what the button clicked is. So this would be the easiest way to start debugging, adding console logs around your code. It might not be the best way, but it's the quickest and simplest way. But then this might not actually work every time. Like you'll be able to see here, for example, like you won't see any console logs that I just added here because the code is not actually running there. So that's one example of when console logs wouldn't be the best, besides the fact that you might forget and then you just leave it there and deploy it.
If I understand correct, so a good use of console logs, because console logs don't really break your code, right? Like they don't interrupt your code at all.
Yeah.
So if you just need to like kind of take little visual snapshots of bits and pieces,
correct,
we could put stuff in there. And in this console log, you're adding some strings, so the string would normally show up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the button clicked, that's a variable from line 1. That's a parameter that's getting passed in.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting from the button click there. I'm adding this to the options of that action. So right here in the function.
So I should just mention just quick. There's lots of ways to make a counter up and down, but Eduardo's example is showing like more complex code, because that's chances are the more complex code is, the greater probability of having to debug it. So
yeah, this is a overcomplicated code just to show how I can debug something.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not the best way of doing a counter, not at all. So then, yeah, here, then we would start seeing something. So here, yeah. So you can see that, like, I'm clicking on the right button, it can tell, but for some reason it's acting weird. And then if you have a better idea, like console logs are very good, as Charles was saying, just to kind of show the state of it for now. But then if you're not sure what's happening and you kind of want to go step by step on your code, instead of using console logs, you can use the debugger. And then what that's going to happen is, once you're running your page here and you have the console open, the debugger is going to stop your code there. So then in here, you can go step by step and see what's happening, and the actual values for, if you mouse over, you can see the values for each variables and what's in there, even for the actions and things like that. And you can inspect in here or on the side. I think here it's a bit confusing, so it's just easier to go and inspect your variables, and why not from here, just by mouse over and then clicking and drilling down and everything, even the params actions, you can see everything from here. So it's pretty handy. And then you can use the first one, which is pretty much the one you're going to use the most, because it won't drill down too much in our code. But then let's say you need to go into a function, which in this case is the add one, then you use the second button here, which would go inside your function. Otherwise, I can show later, it would, if I use the first one, it would just step through. So it would just jump from here to the end of the code pretty much. But this can be a little tricky sometimes, because here, for example, you think, oh, it's just one line of code. So if I click on this one, it should just skip this line and continue the code. But as there's kind of few stuff going on in the background, if you click on this one, it's gonna go in more like in the depth code.
Yeah.
So you
That's
can
really that's really gonna can really throw you off if you're not understanding what's happening there.
Yeah, you can go on a rabbit hole without knowing it. So if something like that happens, use this other one that's the step out. So it should start going back to what called these functions. But even then, like right now it was simple, like it came back pretty easy, but sometimes you'll never get back. So that's why use this one and this two really if you know what's going on. Otherwise, this step over should work well. But let's say then you're using the step over, but and you have this function. So if you step over, I can show again. So if you step over, it's gonna jump to here and didn't actually go into the function there that you want to debug. In that case, what you can do is just by clicking on the side here, you can add a how do you call it again?
Breakpoint.
A breakpoint, yeah. So then once you run it again, if you click on this, the play button, it's going to stop on your breakpoint. So as you can see now, it didn't skip the function. It actually went in, and now you can debug the same way you would before.
So a lot of this is similar. If you do much debugging in FileMaker, these single step, step over, step down into, step up, virtually identical in almost all development environments, because almost all languages are some kind of script-based single steps, and you go iterate over those instructions. In fact, I don't even know if if there are any computer languages that don't do it like that, at least from that aspect. And so this should seem familiar. What's different is there is some other stuff, as Eduardo showed you there, that rabbit hole stuff. And the reason for that is not that it's a BetterForms thing, but we use a technology under the hood called Vue.js. And Vue.js takes care of a ton of amazing things for you. Like you can just hook up a field to a model and it just updates the model. And you can create calculations and all kinds of really cool stuff that we take advantage of. But that has code underneath it. So when you see variables, those variables, they're not sort of true variables in the way that you think of them. They have what's called getters, or these little pieces of code that run. When you try to read the variable, it actually, at that time, you think of it as a FileMaker unstored calculation. You go to read the variable, and sometimes it'll show ... Like, Eduardo, can you get it to like some kind of mid-step where you can mouse over a variable and then don't enumerate the variable? Like, so you mouse over something and then... yeah, and then just don't enumerate, like when you mouse over, don't click on the three dots, just so you can see it.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe in the very first line or something. Yeah, right there. See how you can see three dots next to button clicked? That is basically the browser saying, I haven't evaluated this unstored calculation yet. And until you click on that, that's when it actually evaluates. And an actual code runs underneath the hood, right? We don't realize it, but our browser is probably the most complex piece of software that we use in our daily lives. It's amazing how much stuff is going on underneath here. And it has a ton of ability. You don't have to know a ton about debugging, but just learn about some basics, as Eduardo is shown here, to figure out, you know, what is the state of this variable? Or what's it doing, right? Because it's usually those kinds of inspections. I don't use, what do you use when you're debugging, Eduardo? Do you use console log more or debugging? Like, I always use the debugger more. I virtually never use console log.
It depends. To be honest, it depends, because if I'm not sure what's going on and where the issue is, as I mentioned before, console logs might be tricky because you don't really know where the actual error is, and you might be throwing console logs like randomly, not even knowing where the code is running. But it's just easier, then you don't need to actually step through, you know? Because if you have a more complex code, it's kind of annoying to step through, go step by step. So I end up using more console log, yeah.
Right. I think the adding the breakpoint is really valuable as well.
For sure.
I do that quite a bit of things. I notice a lot of people in FileMaker, when it comes to debugging, they'll start stepping through from the very beginning of like 4 scripts deep into something, and they'll go from the very first one. And it's just, you know, trust that all that code up to that breakpoint is good. set the breakpoint as soon as you know the ingress of the error, wherever it's starting to happen, get it questionable, and then start from there. Sometimes with real deep code, we don't usually have this in BetterForms, but with our base code, for example, I'll walk through something and then I'll say, okay, I know the code is good to here. I set a new breakpoint and clear my old one, so I don't have to keep rerunning it and going from scratch each time.
Yeah. I'm gonna do a test here. Just sorry for interrupting.
No, go ahead.
So I'm not sure if that's gonna work for this now. Maybe not. Because sometimes the console logs, they don't actually happen like time-lapse wise. It doesn't actually happen the way the code is running. Maybe sometimes the console logs, they kind of wait until all the code is run and then they do the console logs ish,
Synchronous.
sort of ish. Because the variables, they can change. That's what I'm gonna try. Like sometimes they're not actually logging the state of that variable at that moment. I think that happens more often with objects, actually. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, let me try this. I haven't tried the test like this piece of code now, so I'm actually live coding now. Key.
My pressure's on now.
Yeah, hopefully it works. So then if I do so that would be this. Then I would console log the test. But then if I click on the up, let's say, and then I change the test to true.
BetterForms doesn't require you to use semicolons. Well, JavaScript technically doesn't.
Yeah.
Some people like to use semicolons, some people don't. Generally, it's probably more robust on average to use the semicolons. I never ever do, but I notice a lot of developers do. It doesn't really, there's no right or wrong there. That's like a whole field of debate. It's kind of like tabs versus spaces type debate.
Yeah.
Andrew, what do you use? You use semicolons? Are you a semicolon guy?
I forget it most of the time. So
okay, you're on my team.
I only remember it because it puts a little exclamation mark in the editor to remind me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I didn't get a good case. But what can happen sometimes, you would actually see on the first console log. Oh yeah, it's showing here.
Oh yeah, you know what? It's when you expand it, right? It's when you expand it, enumerates it. That's why.
Reevaluates. Yeah. So like, it's not showing the actual value here. In this case, it's easy because you can kind of tell that the actual value is over here. But if you had a bigger object and stuff like that, you can actually tell what you can actually see on one line the key you want to see, and then you have to expand, and then the value is there. It's kind of, it seems to be wrong. But what's happening here, it's that the console here, it's evaluating the value again, and that the current value for that key is 2. So that's why it happens like that.
That's a good example.
So in that case, what you want to do is actually do an object assign before you.
Or could you just console log the actual value that you're interested in versus the.
You could, yeah. But then if you want to inspect the whole object,
right,
like what's going on there. So then that's when you do something like this. It's kind of hacky, but if you don't want to step through, but it works, then it's gonna actually log.
That's good. That's a good tip. So object assign is a command that basically makes a copy of the. Technically, it doesn't merge. He's merging an empty object with a solid object and making a new version, a new copy of it. And that's what that is.
Yeah. So now you can actually see the state at that moment.
That's a good tip. I've seen that, but I never really think about it because I know it's enumerating. But if you don't realize what those 3 dots are doing, so just to put this back into FileMaker speak. Imagine opening up the data viewer, and you have an unstored calculation, and sometimes the data viewer it's showing sort of live data, but until you reference that key, like if it's not on, if you have an unstored calc that comes from, I don't know, a list value count of related records or something, and then you don't have that field, let's say, with the unstored calc on your layout, that field is not calculated, right? It's not calculated at that time. So then you go to debug everything and you say, okay, there's 4 related records. Let me open up the data viewer. It's when the data viewer displays it, it actually is calculating the records, but maybe ahead of time, a second or 2 prior to that, the number might have changed. So it's basically the same kind of stuff can happen in FileMaker, but we're sort of aware of it. So he's just saying that these kinds of things can happen in the browser just the same, with these unstored calcs or unenumerated variables or objects.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you use other than console.log? Like I know Steve Winter, for example, he uses console. I've never watched him actually see it use a debugger, but he uses console logs all the time, or console something else. There's a whole series of those. You can console.error.
Yeah, no, I usually just use console logs for debugging.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's error. It's only like
Just
if
format.
it's an actual error though, because the way it shows, it shows like this. Let's see. So it's not very useful for debugging. I don't think. I know. It's just so it kind of says it's an error, but
Right. Gotcha. Yeah.
it's not much of a difference.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's it for now.
If you folks are interested in learning more about like the console and using the console, that might be that's like literally a whole presentation on that. And we could certainly put something together for a future Friday Live, because there's a ton of stuff that happens in that console view.
Yeah,
think
you didn't
that'd be
even show
great.
like the network stuff, the messages.
Pardon me, somebody else mentioned something.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic because I get lost in there a lot. I go down rabbit holes and have no idea what I'm looking at.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, same thing.
That
So it would be a good session.
I'm going to tell you right now, that will never change. You'll always get
Yeah,
lost.
yeah.
It's just so complex, right? Because the people who wrote that are the people who wrote the browser, right? So
Yeah.
they're just they're just a whole different breed. But yeah, okay, definitely we can include some stuff on that.
And
Your tip
Mhm.
for you. Sorry, your tip for using being able to view your browser of a connected device as well is really handy.
Oh yeah, that's
if you're doing a session, that's been quite useful.
Right. So I'll just mention that real quick here. I don't have a maybe I can open up something. And if I plug my phone into my, and stop, somebody's calling me here. If I plug my phone into my browser in Safari, now I have an iOS phone. I'm not sure how to do it in Android, to be honest with you. But if I open up Safari as a browser here, and just a second, let me go to my phone. I'm just going to open up an actual page. There we go. And I will open up an actual FM BetterForms app. I have one saved on my desktop somewhere. I thought I did. There we go. Okay. So on my phone, I have an app running, and it's actually a PWA app. You can see there's no Chrome at the top and the bottom. I launched it from an icon, but it doesn't matter. This should work just the same. And we go into we have to enable the developer tools. I think it's set up in preferences, and then it gives you this menu here, and then you can see Charles's phone. And then from Charles's phone, I can select Safari or the web. And what's really cool is if I do this, even if I mouse over it, you can see in my video here, you can see that I don't even know what that is. That's some other random stuff that's spying on me probably. But I can actually see the app. So it even highlights the app. So it's pretty cool. So now it's going to open up the console. It doesn't open up the browser here because there's nothing to show on my local thing. But this is the DOM for my app that's running. right? So as I mouse over, you can kind of see you can see right on there. Same thing is happening. I can go through and I can set all debugging points. I can see the console. I can set all the debugging points exactly the same, but it's on my local device. It has to be physically connected, I believe. I've never tried it in any other way, if there's another way of connecting it. And I don't know what you do for Android, but it's really helpful for resolving things like some kind of weird div spacing, or figuring out how many pixels that little cheek thing at the top for an newer iOS phone is, or the camera cutouts and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's kind of a super tip there.
You know if that works on Windows as well?
Safari. So
Yeah.
No, it
I
should
don't
work
know.
with Chrome and Android phones as well, but I'm not sure, like Windows and iPhones, I'm not sure. But with Android it should, but there's a little more like settings that I need to do, but it does work.
All right, let's jump to the next thing. How to build breadcrumbs. Somebody asked how to build breadcrumbs. So what breadcrumbs are is just, this is something that Pearson introduced into our app about, I'm not sure how long ago, maybe 4 months ago or something like that. And the goal here is to identify from the UX perspective, there's a couple main things. You should always know where you are, how to get back, and what you're supposed to do on a given page. And breadcrumbs are kind of where you are. And Christina built these, so I'm going to pass it over to her.
Hi, I'll give a little demo on my breadcrumbs. So I made a smaller example for this. And yeah, like in our staging editor, let me actually open that 1 second. In our staging editor, if I go into an app, it will say that it's an app and that's the environment. So obviously the words can change based off of what you want to show to the user. So it's very helpful for the user experience. And in my little demo, I've got 3 breadcrumbs up here that.
Oh, cool.
That is, sorry, I'm a bit nervous because I wrote the code, but I didn't actually prepare what to say. So don't mind me if I'm going in loops or something. So yeah, my example is I've got a people page and I've got a /people detail and a /edit. And then when you go on each page, the breadcrumbs just starts increasing slowly. And how that's done, it's really simple. I would think about it as states. This first page is state number 1, and that's /people. When I go to the next page, it's state number 2, and it's got 2 breadcrumbs inside. And then the third one is state 3. So you can think of building your code as in little blocks of states, and each state will have a number of items in it. So this third state has 3 items and the 2 icons in it. So I've added this inside of my styling and slots, and I've added a header slot here. It looks like a lot of code, but it's really simple. I'm just gonna minimize it just to go one by one. This is my wrapper, and I've got a height of 70 pixels, and it's width full and it's the background. So that's this container over here. And inside of my container, this is my state number 1, that's state number 2, and this is state number 3. And let me zoom into state number 1. You can see I've got a if statement, and I'm using viewapp.root.path, and that returns a string. So it's going to compare if we're on the people page. And I've got an on-click action here that will push the router to /people when I click on the header. And this is basically repeated for the other states also. So my state number 2, I've got the if statement checking whether we're on the people detail. And if we're on that, this will be toggled on. And we'll also see item number 1, which is people. We'll see our icon, and item number 2, which is detail. And this is, of course, again, repeated for third state. And I know it's a lot of repetition, but I mean, I don't think anyone really has a bunch of nav slugs. That's kind of weird. I haven't seen that myself, so it's not like you're going to have a whole block of 500 lines of code for these sort of breadcrumbs.
I guess Christina, so it's just a couple quick things. So you're organizing your pages more or less by the nav-slug hierarchy to figure out what the state should be. Is that right?
Yes, I'm organizing the code to determine that we're inside of a /people, and then it keeps going deeper.
Right. And then we're matching, basically showing each different chunk of breadcrumb or length of breadcrumb based on what it's matching to the router, so where you are physically within your pages of your app. And I think it's good that you're repeating the code, because there's a good probability, and we found this with our editor when you were coding the editor, that when you're on state 3, or the deepest one, let's say, the function of the prior two may change. So like in our editor, I think sometimes things are editable, or the smart link might change as to what it actually does, even though it physically might look the same. Or it might not be a hyperlink, I guess, if you're on a given page, and so on. So like line 13 to 15, if I'm on the second state, that might not be an active thing if I don't click on it, or if I don't go back up, or however the logic is.
Yeah,
does that make sense at all?
Yeah, if I've got on my second page, on people detail, somewhere in my model, I've got something like model dot, I don't know, address that I specifically want to show. So it would be dynamic. That's why it's a good thing to repeat code.
Right.
Have the dynamic stuff you want to add on the different pages.
Right. Whereas if you're on the third state, which is a whole different page, you might not have the address, or you might have just something else. Could be something totally different in that slot, kind of in that second slot kind of thing. It might say something like model dot, I don't know, the person's name instead of the address, or something like that even.
So it's a little bit like the cascading value list, where if you change, well, you got 3 and you change the second one, you need to make sure that the third one is cleaned out, because it could have a different path at that point.
Yeah. And in this case, like if you're on the deepest page, the top 2 pages might show different stuff, totally different stuff than when you're on that actual page.
Yeah.
I think we do that in our editor as well.
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, I won't just have pages that are /people in my website. I'm going to have other pages that have different nav slugs. For example, I do have a /modal in this site, and when I hit enter, you're going to see that there's breadcrumb here, and I definitely do not want that here. This is just ruining my page. And that's happening because you can see I have the if statements inside of my blocks here. So each of these states, I put the if statement in, and the if statement is not in my container. So now that I have other pages with different nav slugs and I want to get rid of this, I'm going to add another if statement. And it's going to be something like view app dot, I think, root dot includes type people. So this is going to check if anywhere in the path includes people, and then this whole container will be visible only then. So I'm going to save it and refresh. It's gone. And let's say I want a different set of breadcrumbs here. I want an orange set of breadcrumbs. I would have to go in and add that also. So I can easily do that by, I'm just going to select all of this and cut it. So I have a parent wrapper. So I'm going to have a div container And just for clarity, I'm going to add comments here. This is the people state.
Hey, everybody on the team, isn't it fun to kind of watch somebody else on our own team code? Like, I think that's really neat. I could watch this all day. Keep going.
I've got my people state, and I want a modal state for my next set of nav slugs. And I'm gonna just paste the same code I have here and remove these bottom two blocks. So in here, I'm going to start changing things to modal. So the path is modal, then that's visible. If this one also, if we're in modal. And I want this to be orange. Save. Refresh. And why isn't that orange? Oh, okay, because that's not a Tailwind class. So now it's a Tailwind class. And I've got my orange here. Now I go back to people, I've got my gray. And there's one more edge case, and that is if in my theme settings, I've got this enabled here, the show top header navigation. You're gonna see my breadcrumbs disappeared. And you can see because the height is bigger than the header, it's peeking out and it's directly behind. So what I'm going to do is just use CSS to push this down by the amount of pixels that this header is. And this is about, I think, 60 pixels. I could also check that by opening my console, clicking on the inspector arrow, going to computed and, no wait, layout. And this is my width and height, and it is definitely 60 pixels over here. So in my code, inside of the container with the background and the height, I'm going to do margin top 60 pixels. And I would want to repeat this for my second state. Over here.
If you haven't seen those square braces with the actual pixels, those are called arbitrary values. They were introduced with Tailwind 3. And if you look at maybe about 5 or so Friday Lives ago, Christina presented on those.
And it's pushed down. So now I've got my breadcrumbs and the header at the top.
Cool.
Yeah. And that's how to get breadcrumbs. It's just dates. And
Okay, now go back and uncheck that header and see if it still keeps
okay.
that.
I will uncheck the header, hit fresh, and ooh, it's got a big block of empty there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll definitely
Missing something.
have to remove that if you don't have the header. So if you take out the header, we would just get rid of this margin top that we added in to handle the header.
I'm gonna say, could that be an if?
Oh yeah,
also in some way that if that state for your header is on, then it does that. Otherwise, it doesn't.
That's right. We can definitely do dynamic classes. So you would have to have like a variable in your model.
Yeah, we'd have to, there's an example of where that variable is. It's something like, I don't know what it is, but it's in the docs somewhere. There's an example. But generally, they wouldn't get turned on and off dynamically. It's kind of an arbitrary decision that the design of the app would make. So
Yeah,
I think it'd be okay.
But I just wanted to have her
no, it's a great
demonstrate it
catch.
and then say, hey, what if I then go turn that off? What happens? Because you may want it to be dynamic.
Well, you know,
And you have to test
you're
for it.
absolutely right. Where it is dynamic is when we don't have the right value checked off and you log out. So BetterForms has the
Yeah.
ability when you're logged out to not show that stuff.
Yeah.
And but there's lots of ways of designing these kinds of things and pushing boxes and what's sitting on top of other things. So there might be other ways of working around it.
Yeah. I mean, I built a lot of dynamic code, just as she was demonstrating it, where she had to repeat. Again, you can write code to write code.
Absolutely.
So I did a lot of that.
And even that, there's so many ways. Like if you have, let's say you have some kind of free-form data structure and you have
Yeah.
some kind of recursive BetterForms pages. You have master detail, and then you click on one of the details, and that takes you into another one or something like that. And you can keep going, and you don't know. There could be 5, could be 2 of them, right? Because they're like folders, for example, if it was a good example, file folders, and you wanted to write breadcrumbs for a file folder path. In that
Yeah.
case, it wouldn't be hard-coded as Christina's designed.
Right.
95% of app cases, it's pretty much you know where you are. And really and truly, what I've noticed with breadcrumbs, they're not true breadcrumbs anyway. They're just kind of visual clues to give you an idea of where you're at. One of the
Right.
things we did notice, though, is once we added these into the app, people actually use them, interestingly enough. And I didn't think they were going to get used. I didn't push back on it, the idea, because I kind of have a firm rule. I don't push back on the UX, but they actually do get used, which is good. So that helps to give people an idea of where they are. And I think that's the real takeaway. There's probably lots of articles as well on like breadcrumb design. I like this technique. It's really simple. I can
Very
wrap my head
cool.
around
Yeah,
it.
I did too. Very good, Christina.
Thank you.
Yeah, useful.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. Christina,
Yeah.
is this a public example, or is it gonna be?
I can definitely paste this into a public example.
Or will you have to like
Yeah, this is a
hack
header
up the
slot.
main app because there's some global stuff in there?
I guess so. It would, but then it wouldn't be visible if I hacked up.
Perhaps, yeah, true enough. But maybe what we could do is still make it an example page, but maybe annotate it that this piece of code has to go into a slot so it doesn't mess up every other example within that app. So one of the problems we have, folks, is when we make these examples, because some examples are global, like in the terms of the whole app. So if we go and we have to kind of hack up something within the app for the example, but then it'll affect all the other examples. So it's not really, so we can't always, and we can't build a separate app for every single example, just for a handful of them. So.
Yeah, this would be visible in every, like this breadcrumb would be visible everywhere. That wouldn't be wanted. Yep. Thank you. That was my breadcrumb.
That was great. Thank you. Anybody have any questions on that? I'll take that as a no. All right, got one more. And then we'll do two for time, and then we can just see if whatever else comes up. Is about using a data store table. And this is a design pattern. You can use this in FileMaker too. It's not really a BetterForms thing, but it's kind of half BetterForms thing. Using a data table storage for miscellaneous data, regardless of shape. So quite often in FileMaker, we just throw a table up, and it could have 5 or 10 records. And it's like, it just adds so much extra cruft for something that we like, oh, I haven't touched that table in years. It's got those 5 records of the templates of emails, and I don't go into them ever again, right? That kind of thing. So we have a need for a lot of that in BetterForms, right? In our actual application. Like, for example, if I go to new page here, and I see these templates, and I look at these tags, and these tags all have mouse overs. And this is going to change because Pearson doesn't like it. But I have these tags, and it just has some information on here, and I can do things like this. And it's like, well, where do I store that list of tags? I want to make them dynamic, because if we add a new page and it has some kind of new whiz-bang tag, I want it to automatically be able to show up here. I want it to show up down here. So that's like a need for extra data store. So So what we do is, this is just an example file, and I think it has a generic data store in it. I'm not sure. Yes, it does. All right. So here's a design pattern that we use. And I know some of you do stuff like this already. And I think it's really, really good. And it has nothing, it's not even about JSON. It's just about a different way of thinking about your data. So I have this example file. You can download this one here. It's in our examples and resources. It just got updated last week. And this is kind of interesting. It's a table. So we start off with a table, and the table's got the regular cruft in it, and it has a key called ID owner, which is the owner of this data. So that could be a foreign key for or a foreign key for like a person, or it might be a process or a workflow. The workflow might be new app. So the owner would be the new app templates, for example. It doesn't have to be a UUID or anything. It's just got to be unique. And the data, and we don't care about what the data is. The data can be absolutely anything. In fact, you could even use it as a container, I guess, if you wanted to, right? Okay. So in here, the ID owner in this case says home page is an example here. And if I just go through these, let me just turn on this, and I don't think there's too much in here. Here's one called get as CSS example, right? This is just another example, and that's the owner. But I'm going to make another one, command new, and I'm going to make the owner, I'll call it Friday Live. Friday Live is the owner. And I want to fetch this data. Now remember, because it's just data, I can put anything I want in it. So I can put JSON, I can put base64, and then reconvert it as long as I know what's in there, right? And I'm going to pretty much know what's in there depending on who's the owner is, right? And the nice thing about this is this is just going to be one record for this particular use case. So let's go into our file here. And maybe we want something like, let me clear this out. I want some type of multi-select. Multi-select, simple drop down. We'll use the complicated one here. And I want to take the values here, and I want to take these values. So let me just save this for a second. And I'm also going to put an HTML block underneath here just to give my page a bit more room. Something like this. Okay. All right. So I got this multi-select here. I got to make this a little bit bigger. Padding on. I'm actually working on this padding. That should do it. All right. And I want to make these values dynamic, but I don't want to have a table for those, right? I don't want to have a whole table and build up a whole bunch of cruft all through my system for this one-off thing, one obscure place in my app. So let me first of all grab the data for those. And I'm going to grab that. I'm going to cut it from here. I'm going to paste it into my Friday Live. We'll put, just keep it a value list, something like that. That'll be my name. So I just pop this data in here. Now, I don't have any validation on to make sure that this is valid JSON because I don't know what I'm going to put in there. I might put base64 in there or something else, totally random. For a logo, we do that for logos and stuff sometimes as well. All right, now I want to make this value dynamic. So I want, I'm going to turn this into a calculation. So it's an underscore calc. And I'll use the same key name just for consistency. So I'm going to create a key in here, and we'll just create an empty array for now, just to kind of emulate where it's going to go so I can remember that. You don't actually need that in there. And we're going to say model dot Friday Live value list. Okay, so it should be empty right now. Should not work. Yeah, it's totally empty. If I was to put this value list inside there, if I was to stick this inside here, it should work again. Just, oops. There, save, and so it's working again. So it is dynamic. Okay, so let's undo that. All right, now let's go over to here. Let's turn on the on form request. It actually happens to be on already. And let's go over and let's fetch this data. And this is how easy this kind of stuff is. Command Shift duplicate script workspace, and let's go into here. Actually, I'm in my example file, crud. I thought it was in my demo file. Let me just change files here really quick. Yeah, let me just change files really quick for this example. Sorry, guys. I thought I was in here. And I think I still have one of these generic data stores in here. Okay. We'll have to use your imagination on this, and I promise it will work. But I'm going to sort of pseudocode it just so you can understand the technique. So just because I don't have this table, actually, I guess I could. Here, it's FileMaker. This is one thing that's kind of nice is I could just do this, I guess. Command Shift D, revert, revert, and I want to just actually I can just copy this. I forget that you can do that. The other day I was working at FileMaker, and it's like, oh, how do I do this again? And only because it was a UI related thing. So let me go into the workspace here. We'll just create that table in there. It actually pasted fast, which is kind of nice because it doesn't always do that. And let's jump to that record, and we'll create a similar record here. So I'm going to take my data, copy, command layout. New, paste, and copy for there. Okay. All right. So I have the same table there. Sorry about that. I have the same table over here so that it'll work with my example, because my example was designed to work with a different file. Okay. So here's what we do in the on-form request, which is right here. We simply do a get column. Sorry, set variable. I'm going to call it, what did I call it? My value, Friday Live value list. And I'm going to do get column as array. And I want to return the generic data store data. I want to get the data when generic data store, generic data store ID owner, and then whatever piece of data I want to get, right? And you can use this for prefs or anything else like that. The data I want to get is the one that's called Friday Live list. And then finally, we just set that into the model, set variable $BF underscore model, copy, and JSON set element. And out of there, I'm going to call it the, what was it called? Friday Live something? Friday, I forget the name of it now. Friday Live list. Is that what it was called?
I thought it was value list.
Value list, Friday Live value. Thank you. Value. Let's hope it is. Well, we'll find out in a second. Sorry. And this is $. Okay. What am I missing? JSON array.
JSON array is misspelled.
JSON, where? JSON, oh, SNS. There we go. All right. Incidentally, if you're looking for the command keystroke to close those windows, it's function return. Function return. That's a super, super valuable. All right. So that should grab Friday Live value list right there. And it should pop it into, just make sure I got the right ones here. Pop it into here. And that should be it. And let's try this out. Where did we go here? Here we are. And if we refresh this, and there's our values. Now, to make sure that this is the real deal, let's change Ruby on Rails. Okay, Python.
That's the wrong file.
Thank you. Close that one up totally. All right, let's change Ruby. Anybody code in Ruby? Sinatra? Yeah, no way. Okay, so let's go Python. Eduardo's working on a machine learning thing in Python right now.
CDML.
So I'm the only one here who gets that, and that's like showing.
Yeah.
Okay, so CDML was this.
What about Lasso?
Even this, the CDML is even older, but
I know.
But yeah, okay, so okay.
Lasso and CDML
Okay, guys,
are
just
similar.
stop right now. Stop right now. Okay. So 10123 and this is it's lasso like this, right? And it's something like it's not FileMaker. I'm just gonna put that in there. Okay. CDML was Claire's something markup language. What was it? Claire's data markup language, something like that. And it was
Dynamic.
Dynamic. Yeah.
CDML was Lasso version 1.
There it is. Stace, how you doing, Stuart?
Good. How about you?
I'm well, thanks. You're showing your age too. Okay. So this is a very old format, but kaboom. So now I'm grabbing this data, 100% dynamic from FileMaker. Right now, where this technique is super powerful is I can put anything I want. It can be an object, it could be text, it could be template, it can be anything in here, including images and stuff like that. It's base64 for little logos. We do that. I guess you could use a container field and put absolutely anything in there, but for the most part, generally we put data in here, and it's one single table. It can serve for the utility stuff like this. I call this like utility data. But you can also use that same table, and as long as the ID owner is pointing to, like, let's say person 17, then it can be dynamic with the rest of your data, and it just sits in there seamlessly, right? So it's virtually effortless, and it's a great addition to any FileMaker file for just putting that little stuff in there. We use it for all kinds of things. When you open up the helper file, it shows like this is a helper file. That's actually a BetterForms app on the landing page of the helper. I don't know if I can open it up. I think I got one here. And
that's kind of an entity attribute value type of
yes,
thing.
it's exactly what it is, right?
Yeah.
But we're just creating the owner as kind of the entity, and then the value. So that's kind of what we're doing there. But you can design it any way you want to customize it. So this content here, this HTML, is dynamically and comes from one of those, right? A whole bunch of value lists throughout the app. We have no value lists at all in our app in FileMaker. They're all in these kind of data stores, and we just fetch them on the fly like that. We use it for mostly like all those tags, and anytime there's some instructions and some things like that. Some of the stuff is hard coded that doesn't have to change, but anything that's dynamic does change along that same way. So that's the last technique. I just wanted to show you how to do that, and you can use that for anything you want. Does anybody do that currently?
We do it quite a bit for our value list.
Yeah, I do it just in FileMaker like that.
You can use it for caching too, right?
Yeah.
We do the same thing with, we'll create another, let's say, new record here. This is really ugly layout, huh? And we'll create one called, cache one. And you put whatever data you want to cache in there, and you just update it when, once an hour or whatever you want to do. And it sits alongside with all your other random data, but this one might change all the time, right? It's just purely, it's a flexible data store. That's it.
Actually, sorry, Judge, you just reminded me that we did use it with the wizards. So when you move from tab to tab to save information, because if it's a long form and somebody crashed in the middle or whatever, or machine shut down, then you have it saved to whatever it was. It's kind of a
That's a great example. That's a great example, Dan. So basically, if you have a big form, don't bother normalizing all of that data into tables right away until the person hits submit, especially if it's one that they're going to have a high abandon rate on. Like some kind of public facing thing where, you're trying to collect something from them and it's not in their best interest to spend all the time. Then just take the entire model under their ID of whatever you're identifying them as, and then you just store it in here underneath that. It could be my name, or it could be my phone number, my email, or whatever. And I just store it in there, and I'm done. And I put the entire model in here, and I do 2 instructions to fetch the whole model back, and that works brilliantly. All right, so that was that's kind of our last technique file. I think we covered actually all of the stuff here.
And of course, nerd sniping myself, using that last technique with what Christina was doing, she could do some of that in like this and be able to
so that's interesting.
Make that a little dynamic.
Especially if you wanted to build an app where, I don't know, it's a software as a service and the client can configure something.
Yeah.
They configure
Yeah.
the levels, maybe.
And clients will, they will.
Yeah, they always come back and ask for something like that. So you could
Yeah,
make something
yeah.
like that and then pass the data that organizes that
Yeah,
dynamic.
I had clients that wanted to change their own menus.
See, what's really nice is it's really easy to take this data and turn it into something pretty. Oh, Chris, you had one question that I don't think I had on here, and you were asking about Tailwind or something like
Yeah,
that.
just how, like, I like Tailwind for styling up pages and that, but how do people use it when it's a big app to make sure you stay consistent? Where are you
Okay.
storing?
They watch our Friday Live from about 4 ago. So that's a really good one. And I'll show you what we do. I don't think I have anything in this. Let me just check this example here.
So you are storing it all in the DOM? Like, that's where I've done it.
Sort of. Yeah. So what we do is if you want to predefine styles, so you're basically saying that I want to create some kind of style for something and then have that consistent everywhere. And then if the client says, I want the chartreuse rather than the grass green, I can change that in one spot and it changes everywhere.
Yep, and I've done it for our colors, like our color scheme that I've defined in the DOM. I didn't know if that's how people are styling.
You don't need to do it in CSS. You don't need to do it in here. You can do it in here, okay? But this is harder, right? Once you get the hang of CSS, it's still hard. I follow some people on CSS, like there's some really top gurus, and they still, when they get into advanced hierarchy and specificity and all that stuff, but you don't need to. What you can do is you can, in your DOM inserts here, you can, and this is not, we have an proper example of this.
I can share mine quickly if you want.
Yeah,
Charles,
if you don't mind, would you, Neil? Because then I'm going to struggle trying to remember how to plot everything like that. And Christina's not going to have any respect for me anymore.
Right.
And Neil, actually, off that Friday Live, you were very helpful. So my colors are all in my DOM, and I was just curious how people are using that.
Yeah, do you need to allow me to share, Charles?
You should be able to, because everybody else could. Let me just see more.
Oh, hang on, I might need to actually be on that. There we go. Yeah, no worries. Sorry. Are you seeing that my DOM there now?
Yep.
Yeah. So I've sort of added some extensions by configuring Tailwind, so some additional sizes and color schemes and stuff, and then you just create a class with the apply and what you want it to be, and then just stick that class in. So I've got like where are we? So fields, for example, I've got input field, input no focus, text area, all different fields, and then the same for labels and stuff, and then just stick that in as a class instead.
Perfect. And that's what it just seemed like that was a weird place for it to go rather than in the CSS. But if this was the right spot to do, I was just more curious where people are doing it.
What's happening is when the library first loads, it reads this stuff. So that's why it's kind of in a script tag, because it's technically as JSON or as JavaScript. And it reads this stuff and it interprets that and it actually puts it into CSS for you.
Okay.
Right. So if you could, after the app is loaded, and if you were to look inside your CSS header, you'll actually see these classes that have been created. Right. And then the library actually watches the classes for arbitrary values and things, because they could be changing, right? They could be changing based on the data coming from the database. So it will generate the new class on the fly and add it in as they come up.
Perfect. No, this is helpful. Thank you, Neil. It's good to see something actually built out and how people did it.
Yeah, it's also been really, really good for being able to then create your own custom theme. So through changing the theme in the app, you can then change, and I think is that last bit there done. Oh, there you go. So I can update these theme colors dynamically to reflect a particular tailwind's color scheme.
Mhm.
So Neil, to make sure I understand here, so you have like theme 5100. So this is a generic, this is kind of like the generic color. And then the database would hydrate this data here, and it would change.
These are the hex values for like the sky tailwind theme. And then when I do the change theme, where's the script change theme? So in my change theme script there, you can then change that tailwind configuration to reflect another color. So like if you change it to rose, it then changes that configuration, and then the whole colors change.
So if you have something that's using like a 50 background, a very light gray or light red, it would just change. It changes all of that.
Yeah. So then you end up with, so that's the current sort of like sky theme. But if I was to go into settings and change it to, and I've not got loads of colors in here yet because, but if I was to change it to that and then just click save, that changes across the whole app then. And because all of the font awesome icons,
that's sweet.
Color scheme.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Well done, Neil. Well done.
Thanks.
Neil, give us a tour. We're just in awe. Like every time you come on here, it's like
So
man, it's looking good. Holy cow.
It's a work in progress, but yeah, we're getting there. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome, man. That's awesome.
But yeah, the fact that there's so many icons now in font awesome, and you just give it a color scheme of text theme 600, and particularly with the duo tone as well.
Mm-hmm.
So then you've got that sort of
Yeah, how do you?
I don't know whether it's.
How do you use the duotone thing? I've never even used it, to be honest with you.
So it's just rather than when you have your
how do you?
So you've got like your FA solid. You just change that to FA duotone, and it just gives you the two colors then.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's on the on the licensed version of Font Awesome, but you can just use them everywhere then, can't they? They're great throughout the app. Yeah, so that when that worked, then you can just change any color, hit save, and it changed the whole thing. It needed a bit of work for the sort of the BetterForms sidebar and stuff, which you do need to do through the where are we? Through the styling. Yeah.
That one's not as targetable.
But it's not massively difficult once you've worked out what changes what color, because then you just use the variables, which again you update through that same.
So that's using CSS variables, which are something that I don't want to say new. They're new, but they've been around for a while. But they're not super common. But it allows you to use a variable in place of a tag, and then you can just through JavaScript you can change that variable.
Yeah, so those variables are just updated in that same action, that change theme global action, and then just wherever I need them down here for the so I think I've just by default used the theme blue, and then where are we? Yeah, there you go. So the side nav is just a case of working out what class controlled which color, and then just sticking that same thing. If anyone wants this at any point, just let me know and I can share that. That's not a problem.
Wow, lots of work. That's really, really cool.
Thanks. You did quite a lot of it as well, Charles. Can't take all the credit.
I just showed you how. That's all. I showed you the techniques, and then I let you run with it. And it's like you come back, and it's like there's a whole house built, and I just showed you how to make a brick. It's like holy cow. So which is cool. How's the pixel the image bit coming along?
Oh right, yes. So if I went on, on my treatment plan, let's go into treatment plan. So as part of the treatment phase, we've got this phase switch. So the bit that Charles originally helped sort out was we've got these two tools. So we've got the dot one where you can select the number of units that's been injected. So you can say, right, so this is for Botox and stuff. So you click on there, and then wherever you click, then it adds on those units, and it adds it all up down the left-hand side for you. And then I took that a step further and added in a line. So you can then click twice and it'll put the line with the total in. The bit that I'm struggling with at the minute is when I select the sort of the freehand tool, you see how it draws off to the right-hand side? So I'm drawing in the sort of top left corner of the head, and it's drawing down here. So yeah, that's where I'm up to on that. And then that was the undo feature that probably isn't working now because I've drawn on this. But the undo feature, if you've not done that, takes off the previous points.
So Neil, do you think it's that the 0 point or whatever, however it's doing it, is of the actual window, not of the image? Because it looks like it's offset the same distance from the left margin to the image. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've got that sort of set up as a grid. So there's my sort of my div that's got the image in, and then this is got that set up with using a grid system. So it's probably something to do with that. But I pinched this drawing element, which off just CodePen. So I just need to really try and work out how that's been done, and we'll get there on that.
It looks great. It looks gorgeous. Like
it does look good. Yeah, I'm happy with how it looks.
And like just the points are just so tight and it looks really, really good.
Yeah. Thanks.
Very, very. It feels very professional, and I can imagine a customer or a patient, I guess, a patient sitting there and looking over the clinician's shoulder, and they see this on there, and it's a comforting thing. Like, it doesn't look janky. It's like, if there was like big ugly arrows and things like that, like if there was bad UI, it wouldn't have the confidence. You wouldn't have the confidence that this person's going to stick needles in your face.
Absolutely, yeah. And the end goal really on this, I think, would be if I can have the ability for I haven't done this, but yet the select image, so where the clinician can maybe take a photo of the actual person. I'd said about having an overlay to the camera, so that the face is the right size. You can hold the camera up and fit the face within this outline, so that it's the right size, and then the clinician can actually physically mark up exactly where.
So the way you make that overlay is exactly the same as the way you're doing it here. You absolute position the two items to the parent div, right? So the parent's relative and then the two children. The one is the image and one is the overlay. And the overlay has to be absolute positioned in the top and the left to the top corner. And of course, the same size. And then what I've done, what Andrew has done is in an app is we've taken a Font Awesome icon, one that has like two kind of square braces, and made it ginormous. If that's a barcode scanning area, but it's almost the same thing. It's a Font Awesome, maybe FA user, for example, which is almost the same silhouette as this person here. And then give it that an opacity of 20% or something like that, and then just stick that on there. That kind of an idea, and that's it. That's all you have to do for the overlay, and it'll show up right above the actual video, the live video feed of what you're doing as well.
Okay, that's a great idea. Thanks. All right, there you go. Thanks. Am I still sharing? There we go. Stop.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. It's so neat to see the different things that everybody builds all the time. Sometimes you help somebody. Like I noticed Melvin's on here, and he just shipped his first app, and you check in with him every week or two, and it's like, oh, it's done, and it looks good, and everything's working, and you can see all the embellishments that people have made and stuff. It's pretty cool. Very, very rewarding for our team to be able to see this kind of stuff. So thank you.
I'll just add there, Charles, that I think that one of the things that really helps is all of this stuff and all of the support that you gave me, and a big shout out to Andrew. Absolutely brilliant. Really helpful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, none of it would be possible without the support of you guys. So I say it each month, but thanks ever so much, because without the sort of the answers that you come back with so quickly, I wouldn't have got it off the ground. So yeah, really appreciate it.
It'll be reflected in the subscription price.
And I'll just add, I think it's the passion as well. I think it's the passion that you guys show as well for the product. It really comes through. And it's absolutely brilliant product. So we went live, part live yesterday, and we are going fully live Tuesday. I've got quite a long weekend ahead of us.
Your app, Melvin, it's replacing a paid service?
Yeah,
for the most part?
So I'm the head of delivery and engagement for a apprenticeship training provider, and we obviously work lots of organisations that need apprentices, and we used to use a paid for online recruitment tool, which was quite expensive, but also was quite limited in what it was able to do. And I've got, albeit I don't do it anymore, but I did have a background in FileMaker right back to the days of FileMaker 5. And then I across a video on YouTube a few months ago of Charles talking to, I can't even remember who it was now, Charles, but sort of demoing and talking to someone with FM BetterForms. And it sort of intrigued me, and then obviously we started there. So the great thing now is that we've got a system that incorporates every element of what we do. The employer from an order form that then populates the database, the app, applying, and it's seamless now. Whereas previous things like job form, they were filling that information in, then have copy and paste data into the app, and it just really comes out. As soon as you click that button, things are happening. Things are being behind the scenes. It's working. It's pulling it through. So we know it's really, it's working brilliant. It's working really brilliantly.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. Actually, I'm going to stop our recording and finish up our thing. I did have one couple quick questions for the group here afterwards. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday live.